Coming up, I'll be speaking with Wing Young Huie, the photographer of the University Avenue project. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. Along with Lisa Tabor, I'll be guest hosting during 2010 while regular host Mike Wassenaar is on sabbatical. With me today is Wing Young Huie, photographer of the University Avenue project. Welcome, Wing.
Thank you, John.
Your work has been good for years and years, but suddenly there's this huge blitz of publicity. You're everywhere. How's it feel?
Well, this is the biggest project that I've ever done. My Lake Street USA exhibition, public exhibition 10 years ago was a 6-mile exhibition, and I didn't think I was going to do another 6-mile exhibition, but working with Public Arts St. Paul and Christine Potus Larson, she approached me almost 4 years ago and asked me if I were to consider doing another project like Lake Street on University Avenue. And I thought about it, but Lake Street was it took 4 years. It was a big chunk of my life, and wasn't sure whether I wanted to have the energy to do a project like that. But there was a grant available from the Joyce Foundation, and we literally, she told me about the grant deadline a week before, and so we put the project together, a project proposal, and we got the grant. And now here, 4 years later, we've got a large-scale exhibition with 250 photographs along 6 miles of University Avenue. Photograph thousands of people. And every night there is a projection of images, a slideshow of revolving images on a 40-foot screen across from Walmart, accompanied by pre-recorded music from local musicians. And we are going to have our first live performances, our first cabaret, this Saturday, the 29th, and once a month, the last Saturday of every month, there will be performers singing, dancing, different performances, people sharing something personal about themselves and their connection to University Avenue.
Tell me about the Lake Street USA project first. How much was that a template for this? That was also quite a long-term project, many photographs. And what inspired that? How did you come to do long, skinny, streets?
I've done a lot of different projects, all different. Some are geographically based, some are conceptual. But the two biggest projects I've done are University Avenue and Lake Street. And with Lake Street, I'm the youngest of 6, and I'm the only one in my family that wasn't born in China. And I'm the only one that was born in the United States. I was born in Duluth, and I'm a native Minnesotan. I've never even been to China. So as the youngest of 6 and the only non-immigrant in my family, in fact, my family immigrated illegally. We were fortunate, we were granted an amnesty, but there was one point when I was a child when our family could have been deported. So I think that growing up and wanting to be a writer, my first ambition was to be a writer, and I read a lot as a kid. But I enrolled in the journalism department at the University of Minnesota, and not photojournalism. This is a news editorial sequence, so trained to be a reporter. But discovered photography when I was 20. And my first subjects were my family and my own neighborhood. And so I think the experience of growing up a child of immigrants and growing up in Duluth informed, in a way, all my projects. The first person I really photographed was my father. And I didn't know my father that well because he worked 7 days a week. like many immigrants, when he first came to the United States as a teenager, he worked 16 hours a day and didn't know English, was uneducated, and really had no skills. And as a Chinese immigrant in this country, if you didn't have skills, what you could do was open up a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah.
So he immigrated to Duluth. There was another family from the same village in China, but part of the reason why he came to Duluth, I think, was he knew that he wanted to open up a restaurant, and he wanted to be in a place where there was little competition. So instead of, say, moving to Chinatown in San Francisco, so he was a pioneer in that way, but also at the sake of isolating his family culturally. So photographing my father, after working 16 hours a day, finally started as a chef and a manager and opened up his own restaurant. So by the time I came along, his business was very successful. Mm-hmm. My father was pretty well known. And so I think photographing my father was exhilarating because I really didn't know my father. He worked 7 days a week, and he left for work before I got up to go to school. And when I came home, he finally came home probably about 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. And so I didn't really get to know him until I started working for him. But photographing him was maybe one of the most intimate things I ever did with a man who was not easily knowable. So I interviewed him for Lake Superior Port Cities magazine after graduating from the University of Minnesota with a journalism degree. But I discovered photography when I was 20 and basically taught myself photography. So interviewing my father was great because I was able to ask him questions I never would have asked him. But photographing him was even better. It was a bit surreal photographing someone that I've seen almost every day of my life, but I felt like I never really looked at him and really tried to scrutinize him through the camera lens. And so I think that that experience I try to keep with me still, whether I'm photographing something familiar or unfamiliar. I try to see it with new eyes.
These photographs with your father, were they formal portraits? Were they candids? Mm-hmm. Some of each?
Well, I think that in a way everything I do is sort of spontaneous mm-hmm. and candid. I don't pose anyone. I'm more observing. Mm-hmm. And but I think all the people that I photograph, I mean the thousands of people that I photograph, in a way, they're all collaborations. Mm-hmm. I think that often the photographs that you see on a daily basis, you know what it is the photographer is trying to tell you. You know what it is that they're trying to sell you. And I like photographs that look as though they took themselves, so that the presence of the photographer is not easily noticed. So in that sense, I react to what I see more than I try to conceptualize it or pre-visualize it.
And so at that time you began a career as a professional photographer, is that right?
No, it took quite a while to become a professional photographer. So after graduating from college, I freelanced as a journalist. And we get hired to do the reporting and writing. Mm-hmm. And then I would offer my services as a photographer. And we get hired to take the photographs that we're doing for free, and built up my photography portfolio that way. But after a while, I quit the writing part, mm-hmm. or as a freelance reporter, and really focused on photography. But a lot of my 20s was spent bartending, working in restaurants, because that's what I knew. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy to make a living as a freelance journalist. Yeah. So you have to be really a prolific writer, and I'm not wasn't a fast writer. So at night I bartended, and during the day I built up my photography portfolio, and eventually quit bartending and did all kinds of photography to make a living. So weddings, graduation pictures, worked for modeling school, but the bulk of what I did was documentary or editorial photography. And So I eventually made a full-time living doing that. But after a while, I got kind of burnt out. I mean, first it was great to be able to be self-employed and not bartending, and to make a living doing photography. So I had a darkroom wherever I lived, and back then, you know, I still am doing film, but I processed my own film. So I had a darkroom. I always lived in like studio apartments. I had a darkroom in the bathroom, I had a darkroom in the closet, and then finally we moved to warehouse space and built a darkroom. But it took quite a while to build that up to make a living. And then when I did, I was freelancing for almost all the publications in the Twin Cities. You know, City Pages back in the day when it was the Twin Cities Reader. Mm-hmm. I worked for business publications, City Business, Corporate Report, the Minnesota Law Journal, all different kinds of magazines, and doing public relations work and advertising and just everything I could do to make a buck. And so it was great.
So that was kind of journeyman work, but something had your heart.
Exactly.
And did that grab you before the Lake Street USA project?
Well, what happened was that I got burnt out doing commercial work. And at first I was sort of making a differentiation between editorial and, say, advertising. Mm-hmm. But eventually the lines were blurred. And whether it was an art director or an editor, I felt I was illustrating something. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't doing the kind of work that made me want to become a photographer in the first place.
What do you mean when you say you were illustrating something? Mm-hmm. It kind of sounds to me like you were portraying something, but also conscious of what's not being portrayed, what's being concealed.
Yeah, well, you know, as a freelance photographer, I mean, you're gun for hire, and your job is to illustrate some art director, editor's concept of a story. And so I think it's great work, and I have a lot of admiration for the journalism profession. But the kind of photographs that made me want to become a photographer were, you know, a lot of it was the iconic photographers, say like Henri Cartier-Bresson or Robert Frank or Walker Evans, Diane Arbus. So those were the kind of photographs that I wanted to do. Photographs that existed on their own rather than to illustrate a story. And so I think that I wanted to be an artist. So I quit commercial photography. I didn't quit, but I really tried to do my own work. Mm-hmm. And I actually got fired from one of my jobs. I had a job at the City Business, mm-hmm. which was weekly, and I was every week I was photographing people in offices. I photographed every kind of business situation, warehouse, light industrial, all sorts of companies, and I got fired. Because I wasn't doing, I lost enthusiasm mm-hmm. for what I was doing. And that's when I decided to pitch some stories to another magazine called Colors, which was a locally published magazine, doesn't exist anymore. And I had several ideas, and one of the ideas was to photograph a neighborhood. This is 1993. And the publisher said, well, I like your ideas, but I think the neighborhood one sounds the best. Why don't you go after that? Mm-hmm. So, you know, because the neighborhood I grew up in, Duluth, was not very diverse. We were the only Asian family in our neighborhood in Duluth, and I was always the only Asian kid in school. Every room that I was in growing up, if there was another Asian person in it, I was related to him. Yeah. So, going to school and being the only Asian kid, I remember another Asian kid showed up when I was a junior in high school, and I avoided him. And I don't think at the time I was really that conscious. I was avoiding someone who looked like me. But thinking back on it, and especially with the kind of work that I do, and particularly my third book, Looking for Asian American Ethnocentric Tour, I started thinking about my own ethnocentric filters. And I started thinking about that kid who showed up. And what I realized was that, like every kid, you know, you want to think you're like everyone else. or inside at least, you feel like everyone else. But it's not like you grew up with a mirror in front of you. When I saw this kid, I thought, well, he stands out. Well, therefore, I must stand out. And that made me feel uncomfortable. You know, there was very little in popular culture, still, that reflected my family's realities and my own reality. You know, growing up, there was Connie Chung, Bruce Lee, you know, kung fu stars. But as I became formed by popular culture, by the culture of the state, the Vikings, Paul Bunyan, Mary Tyler Moore, Lake Wobegon, I started to realize that my true ethnocentric filter was white. As I wrote in a series of essays for Looking for Asian America on Ethnocentric Tour, I wrote that my mom made me pray to Buddha every Chinese New Year, but it was really Jesus Christ Superstar that became my cultural touchstone. So I think that growing up, people would ask me, where are you from? And I would say, oh, I'm from Duluth. And then people would say, no, where are you really from? And I said, no, really, I am from Duluth. It's not a question that everyone gets. It's an innocent question, but it implies a lot, because not everyone gets asked that question. It implies that I must be a foreigner. I'm not quite as Minnesotan as you are. Or maybe I'm adopted. So I think the realities of who we are as Minnesotans hasn't caught up. The perception of it hasn't caught up to the realities of who we are.
And that's something that you always try and get at. It comes through in a lot of your photographs.
Well, I'm really trying to photograph the cultural landscape.
Let me just put an interruption in here. In case you're just joining us, I'm talking to Wing
Young Huie.
Wing Young Huie, the photographer of the University Avenue project. And we're going to start talking about, we've not gotten to that yet, so we should probably start diving into that now. The university, you first did the Lake Street USA project, and then the University Avenue project, starting about 2006. And you took photographs over, was it over 4 years?
Well, this is pretty much a 4-year project. Christine Portis Larson, the president of Public Arts St. Paul, produced this exhibition, and we received a grant from the Joyce Foundation. That got us running. But the proposal that we had at first was modest compared to what actually happened, and the budget grew and grew. And so there are many moving parts for this exhibition involving, I mean, this is really a large-scale collaboration involving thousands of people that I photographed, all our partners. The projection site in itself is a big production. Steve Dietz, who is the creative director of NorthernLights.mn, is a former curator of new media at the Walker Art Center, where I first met him when I had an exhibition there in 1999 called Unfinished History. And he is internationally experienced at producing public art installations. And so we had this idea of projecting photographs in public, and we approached him, and he said, well, why don't you do a spectacular projection outdoors? I said, what does spectacular mean to you? He said, well, you could do it, you know, on a 40-foot screen attached to metal shipping containers. You could stack them like building blocks, like Legos. And so he created the concept, and he had Meyer Shear and Rockcastle design the site. MS&R designed the Mill City Museum. They are one of the best architectural firms around. And he was able to get them to buy into the idea. They loved the project. And so they donated their services. So this projection site every night from May 1st to the end of October will be a projection of images onto this 40-foot screen, accompanied by music from about 50 local musicians of all different genres and cultural influences.
When we close out the show, we'll go back over that, talk a little bit about the public projection and the other events and other things that happen along the avenue. In the meantime, let's take a look at some of the photographs that you've taken. If we could dial up some of those photographs. Here's the first one. Go ahead.
So a lot of what I do is just wander around. I approach people on the streets. I tell them I'm a professional photographer, I'm an artist, and I'm doing a community photography project. I'll walk up to you and say, hey, this is what I do. Can I take a picture? So a lot of people say no, but a lot of people say yes. And they introduce me to other people. And I'll walk into the businesses, or I'll walk, and I photographed in 9 different schools along the avenue. So a lot of it is wandering, and a lot of it is approaching organizations and businesses, and really trying to get a picture of all the different folks who live, work, go to school, shop, worship, play along the avenue.
And this is an example of that.
Yes, this is a restaurant that I eat at all the time, Cheng Heng. And they have a big mural of Angkor Wat, the temple, the most famous place in Cambodia. It's really an icon for the country. And I photographed this gentleman. His daughter and her husband own the restaurant. And he's Cambodian, and I think all the Cambodians that are here in the United States are in some way survivors of the killing field. And he told me an unbelievable story. So we're sitting in his restaurant telling me the story, and I was probably there for about an hour, but I think he could have gone on for hours talking about how he survived. And he, just like most Cambodians who emigrated here, they lost family and they lost friends. And he talked about having to march through the jungle for weeks. And one story he told, once he was put to work, he was in charge of the water buffalo. And there were over 100 head of water buffalo. And he knew that if he lost one, he would be killed. And so he obsessively counted the water buffalo every day, many times during the day, even counted them at night, counted them in his sleep. And he named every one of the water buffalo, and he knew each one by their hoof print.
Wow.
And so he was able to survive, made it to a refugee camp, came to the United States, and his family owns a restaurant. His wife, or his daughter, who owns a restaurant, she was pregnant at the time I did the interview, and she was sort of listening to him tell the story that that she was a little girl when it happened. And so she comes over and she pulls up her pants leg and shows scars on her ankles. She said, when the Khmer Rouge didn't like what you were doing, or you weren't doing something fast enough, they put me in an anthill, red ants without shoes. And so he had a son that died during that. And so it's just an amazing story. The thing about University Avenue, as you walk down University Avenue, or you live there, you bus down, you see all these different folks from all different facets of life, but you don't know their stories. And you can imagine what their life is like, but you don't really know. And so I think with my photographs, a lot of them I wrote stories that accompanies the photographs. Also, I used a chalkboard. And with my previous projects, like Lake Street, I interviewed a lot of the people that are in the photographs, and included their words alongside the photographs when I displayed the photographs on Lake Street. With this project, I decided to incorporate the words directly into the photographs. And so I decided to use a chalkboard. And I approached hundreds of students and people on the street and people in different circumstances, and asked them a series of questions.
And some of those photographs are coming up, correct? We
Some of those
only have
photographs,
about 5 minutes left, so we should probably move on and look at the next one.
Let's move to the next one. So here's an example of, this is a Duxi Academy Most of the students are Somalian. And I decided to use a chalkboard because I wanted to incorporate the words directly in the photograph. But then I said, what am I going to ask them? And so I decided to come up with a series of questions that were not easily answered, but that would elicit a wide range of emotions and fears and thoughts and dreams. So the questions are, what are you? How do you think others see you? What don't they see? What advice would you give to a stranger? What is your favorite word? Describe an incident that changed you. And the last question was, how have you been affected by race? And then after asking these questions, sometimes people would write the answers down, or sometimes it would be a verbal exchange. I would only choose one of the answers that I would ask for them to write on the chalkboard. So I think in that sense, photographs that don't have a chalkboard, just like when you walk down the street, you imagine what their life is like. And with the chalkboards, you get these small revelations. And people revealed some very intimate things. It was surprising to me. And so I think that at first I wasn't sure how many of the chalkboard photographs I would do. But as it turns out, it's now really kind of the backbone of the exhibit. About half the photographs are these chalkboard photographs.
Let's go ahead and look at the next one.
Mm-hmm. This is a Lutheran minister. I also did another project, which, and some of the photographs from that project were taken along University Avenue. I included them in this project. I was working on a project with Allison Adrian. She's an ethnomusicologist, and she teaches music at the College of St. Catherine. And she's doing her dissertation when she was at the University of Minnesota on Lutheran churches and collecting and recording Lutheran music. And she had a CD produced. All of this Lutheran music, all of these hymns, none of them were in English. And so I photographed 20 congregations with her, congregations that were Ethiopian or Hmong or Laotian, Nigerian, folks from all over the world. And so looking at the prism of Minnesota culture through Lutheranism, and showing the kind of diversity that exists, because one of the ideas about Minnesota, one of the stereotypes about Minnesotans is that of Lutherans, that Lutherans are all Scandinavian. And we had an exhibition at Bethel College, and we were showing the students there, and even the students there were surprised. One of the staff said, you know, we send our students overseas to show the diversity. He said, I didn't realize it was right here in the Twin Cities. Of course, this is happening with every kind of denomination, but it's surprising to people.
Very interesting. We've got about 2 minutes left, and we want to talk a little bit about how the public can take advantage of the University Avenue project. There's the central nightly showing, weekends?
Every single night.
Every single night?
Every single night at dark.
Okay.
Dark in May is about 8:30 p.m. Dark in June will be about 9 p.m.
Okay. We should say where it is.
Across from Walmart, 1 block west of Hamline University.
Okay.
And you won't miss it because there's stacked metal shipping containers there. So every night from about, say, 8:30 to 10:30, there's a slideshow. And we have benches set up. We want it to be kind of a town square. And so you don't have to see the whole show, just see part of it. And if it's a beautiful night and you're thinking of something to do, head to University Avenue and to our projection site. Every Wednesday night I'll be there to facilitate a discussion, or you can ask me questions about the project. This coming Saturday, May 29th, will be our first cabaret. We'll have a stage set up.
And will that repeat?
Every last Saturday of the month. So we're going to have 6 cabarets, once a month, in May to October.
Wonderful. Wing, thank you so much for appearing with us.
Thank you, John.
Okay. I've been talking to Wing Young Huie, the photographer of the University Avenue project. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on the St. Paul Forum.